Good afternoon and welcome everyone. We'll give it a couple of minutes to let people continue to join in the room before we get the meeting started. And while you're here, you can also share where you're coming from in the chat box function. We'll give it one more minute and then we'll get going. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Welcome everyone again. Thanks so much for joining us for today's beta launch Learning Modules event on framing, mapping, and addressing cross-border digital policies in Africa. It is good to see you. Some of you I have already met before, and some of you don't know me yet. So my name is Tracy Singh-Postin, and I'm the International Research and Project Management Coordinator at the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network based in Paris, France. Bonjour. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. The workshop duration is an hour and a half, and we would like to make sure that you mute your microphones when you are not speaking, but we do encourage you to keep your video on. And the session will be conducted in English with interpretation in French. So you'll see the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. The workshop will be recorded and it's recording at the moment. And for your information, the project materials and resources will be made available on our INJ website. We're very excited to provide you with an update since our last workshop, and particularly on how the learning modules can be adapted and used by digital policymakers and shapers, not only through the INJPN platform, but through partnerships. So we have on today's agenda, we're pleased to have our guest speakers that have contributed to the cross-border digital policies report, but who also play an integral and a key role in African digital and data landscape on issues related to data governance, digital transformation, and access, to name but a few. So to get us started, I now wanted to hand over to INJPN's Executive Director, Mr. Bertrand de la Chapelle, who will provide us with some opening remarks. So over to you, Bertrand.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to welcome you all today. This is, as Tracy mentioned earlier, the launch of the beta version of the learning modules of a new Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network report, which explores the issues of digital policies in Africa, and particularly their cross-border dimensions. It is the third report in a series that INJPN has produced after a global status report and another regional report that was related to Latin America and the Caribbean. To do the report on Africa, we partnered with Research ICT Africa from South Africa, and more specifically with Alison Gilwell, who is its executive director, and we will speak a little bit later today. She is a very well-known and very respected expert in those fields, and she was responsible with her team to write the report in close coordination with INJPN. This report has been launched in two versions. The English version was launched on the occasion of the IGF in Addis Ababa in November last year, which I think a lot of you attended. The French version was launched later on, at the beginning of March this year, in collaboration with Francophone partners from regional internet governance forums in North Africa, Benin, and Chad. The general purpose, the overall objective, is to provide broad regional mapping exercise of the digital policy challenges and opportunities in Africa, which is a growing topic in the region. And the goal was basically to connect a very diverse community of actors to shape a common understanding of those opportunities and challenges. It is actually, I would say, an important part of the mission of INGPN as a policy network to provide a platform to exchange regional voices on the global digital policy making. And a lot of you here in the call today are experts on those issues in the region. And it's a real pleasure to actually have you here today. So the purpose of the call today, of this meeting today, is to present the first iteration of the learning modules online that have been developed on the basis of the report. And about this report, I want to highlight that its purpose is to identify key trends and initiatives taking shape in the region to build a digital economy that is inclusive and growing. And the report presents all the opportunities and challenges that have to be addressed by all the different actors. It can be governments, businesses, and civil society. I won't go in the details of the report that I encourage you strongly to go and have a look online, but I want to highlight a few key points. The first one is the importance of coordination between a lot of different actors, because this is necessary to move progressively towards harmonization and convergence of legislative environments. And I insist on the word progressive development and moving forward harmonization, because given the very different development capacities and national context in Africa, it is probably likely that we shouldn't be aiming, or you shouldn't be aiming at full harmonization right away, but rather as a progressive path towards fuller harmonization. The second point that I want to highlight is that strengthening the digital infrastructures that include not only connectivity, but also the network of data centers can be a major ambition. We know it's a challenge as well, but it can be a major ambition for the continent. And it actually lends itself particularly well to a continent-wide reflection that would benefit everyone, particularly in terms of the distribution of data centers, as I mentioned. The third point is that the policies, the digital policies that are being developed, do not only concern the technical sector or the internet sector. They also have very strong connections with achieving sustainable development goals on the continent. And we can think in particular about responsible data sharing in a diversity of fields like agriculture, access to water, urban planning, energy, and many others. And last but not least, it's important to highlight that, like many regions around the world, Africa is largely subject to regulations that are actually developed elsewhere. And the challenge is not only to develop the national and regional legislations or regulatory frameworks, but also to strengthen the participation and the collective voice of African actors in the international debates about the future of the digital society and data governance in particular. A final point before moving into the actual discussion about the spirit. The way we did this report is that through several dialogue workshops, we tried, and I hope we created, a space for mutual respect between the different categories of stakeholders in order to allow the governments, businesses, civil society, academia, and intergovernmental organizations to share their perspectives on digital policy issues. And more than ever, on those issues, a multi-stakeholder dialogue is essential and should be pursued. A second point, we all know that these are very difficult issues. But I would like to encourage you, in general, to look at those challenges and opportunities as things that you have in common and that you must address in common, rather than too often as problems that you or the different stakeholder groups have with each other. Many issues can actually be framed in very different ways and different perspectives. And in many cases, or I would even say most often, those different perspectives are not just conflicting, they are probably more complementary. So the second message regarding the spirit, beyond the open multi-stakeholder dialogue, is that achieving a common framing of the issues is a critical prerequisite for finding solutions. And I wanted to mention this because I hope that this is a message that will help you and inspire you in your own work. So finally, today's meeting has two main parts. First, we have a series of opening remarks and a presentation of the learning modules themselves. And the second part will be a discussion on the topics that have emerged in the context of our dialogues, and particularly in the various vertical sectors of this vast continent. So I really look forward to those interactions, and I'm very pleased to welcome you once again. And I now will pass the virtual microphone to Alison Gilwald from Research ICT Africa for her own remarks, and to share some highlights from the underlying report on cross-border digital policies in Africa. And then afterwards, we can move to the modules themselves. Thank you very much for being here, and I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you so much, Bertrand. Tracy, can I just go ahead? Sorry, I think you were about to. Yeah. I guess I just following on from what Bertrand has said, I suppose I also wanted to make some comments more generally than the highlights of the report itself, mainly in the context of how dynamic and complex this environment is, and how important these multiple initiatives are in increasing the dialogue, but also allowing Africans to engage on these issues, and quite honestly, often not to reach consensus, but at least to have moved forward, to at least have moved some of these discussions forward. Some of them are very complex, and there are different interests at stake. But I think what's important about this is that, if we look, we're just completing a new round of after access surveys, which are really demonstrating the devastating effects of the pandemic and of the economic fallout, and the difficulties of harnessing digital technologies and digital opportunities for purposes of economic reconstruction and democratic state formation, and these kinds of things that have been enormously eroded by the expansion of social networking and social these platforms. But in fact, in terms of the access to them, the marginalization from them, this has actually increased. In many countries, we have a reduction or actually hitting a wall in terms of internet policy, in terms of internet penetration post-COVID, so for a range of reasons. So some of these fundamental underlying, wicked policy problems that we've been all trying to address are kind of more, present than ever before, and very much in the context of the UN Secretary General's call for a more equitable global digital compact, in which these kinds of initiatives really need to be located and are contributing to understanding better. So just to say, while we were doing this report now a year ago, we had just completed a process with the African Union data policy framework that the African Union Commission developed, and we worked with them on, and was accepted by member states a little, shortly thereafter, so early last year. And I think this is really important, because a lot of the things that are raised in the document around the need for greater coordination, the need for greater harmonization, are actually in play. But these things are very difficult to implement. And so I think these initiatives that are actually looking at how we can unleash these cross-border data flows in a way that is rights preserving, that does respect both personal and national sovereignty, without restricting the opportunities that go with it, are very important to work on that implementation, and to actually ensure that we have the capacity to deliver on these really, I think, quite progressive, actually, by global standards, data policy frameworks that we have, and that can actually improve conditions for all people on the continent and between the continent and other areas. And so I think in this regard, what's also important, and what came out very strongly in the report, is that although we are concerned by the increasingly extractive nature of the global economy, and I think we are seeing a lot of pushback in terms of calls for both economic regulation in order to ensure that the opportunities that go with this are more evenly distributed, and particularly within Africa and beyond Africa. But the importance of harmonization, the importance of the African Union data framework, and these various initiatives that might assist unleashing the potential that is there, is really critical in terms of a new narrative that we're wanting to see, and which came out in the discussions from people in the report, that yes, there are these digital inequalities, there are these legacies that remain such a challenge, and unless we address them, as we've said in this report, as we've said in the data policy framework, unless we address those foundational challenges that we have, we can forget about talking about unleashing a digital and data economy. So those issues remain, but I think there is an emerging narrative from the digital transformation strategy, from the arising African data policy framework, from this kind of initiative, looking at, this is all very well, but it's actually going to be critical that this harmonization happens through, interoperable standards, interoperable standards and regulation and policy that will allow us to, for example, reap the benefits of the African continental free trade area, which, although the digital aspects of that were not negotiated in the first round, they are very imminent now. And unless, and this is kind of low-hanging fruit, we don't have to be held up as we were with the Malabo Convention, with getting a convention that has to be ratified by everybody. I think the value of this is the notions of progressive realization of these very high-level principles that are absolutely attainable in time, and that we have to, in order to ensure that there is a trusted environment that we need in order for people to benefit from this and engage and participate in this. But I think what we're actually seeing is an emerging narrative about an opportunity, and there's a moment both to participate in global regulation around a more equitable environment, a more secure and safe and trustworthy environment. But there's also an opportunity, there's also a narrative emerging on Africa being open for business, of Africa actually harnessing these technologies in order to realize the objectives of Agenda 2063, to be honest, and all the emerging aspects of that. And so I think these kinds of capacity building tools. I think we've seen, we've seen this, we've seen with Diplo Foundation, we've seen with various other initiatives, all complementing each other on ensuring that African voices are heard, heard at the national level or heard at the continental level, are engaging much more in a much more organized way at an international level to represent interests. But that until we get these kind of issues resolved and the capacity in order to deliver on them, we are not going to achieve many of these objectives. So I think just to say that I think these are all wonderfully complementary opportunities. It's moving very fast. So there's an opportunity in the training to begin to look at some of the shifts that have already happened since the report was written, to be updating that training, to be seeing this training as complementary to other training that is going on, and to really address what was one of the main issues that came out of the report, was the capacity deficits in several areas, from regulation, from legal, from technical, and of course, fundamentally from a kind of infrastructural point of view as well. So just to say, this is coming at a time that we're moving into the second phase, the implementation phase of the data policy framework, which has got these capacity building, self-assessment tools that are attached to it, that these different programs that are being developed that are looking at specific areas can really be used to ensure that this moment is seized, and we realize the objectives of a competitive digital data economy in Africa.
Thank you very much, Bertrand, for sharing, for welcoming today's participants and providing some key background information on the spirit and the structure of today's event and overall of the project. And also to you, Alison, for sharing some of those highlights and building on the comments and sharing with us the infrastructure and the work that is going on in the continent that will be very promising in the future. So before I hand over to the next session regarding the learning modules, I just wanted to share with you a few statistics. So as you can see, we're very happy to have 124 registrations from 31 countries with a good stakeholder engagement mix. And overall, we've had throughout the journey, we've had 97 participants in the knowledge dialogue workshops, with over 100 data contributors and interviews combined, stakeholder engagement from over 300 countries in academia, civil society, government, private sector, the technical community, and African, regional, and international organizations, etc. We have also, we're also at the last phase of this project, which will see the launch, which is today, of the learning modules, which you'll hear about more in the next session. And also, I've provided here a timeline of the work that we've done over the last 24 months with the support of GIZ and BMZ, with the objectives to have these dialogues and provide a regional mechanism for stakeholders from the African continent to share knowledge with one another and to develop capacity on addressing cross-border digital policies for Africa. We've had, over the course of the 24 months, recurring workshops, and today will mark the 10th one, and which also included providing input into the data collection, which enabled the finalization of the report. And as I mentioned already, today is the learning modules that will be shared with you for the beta launch. Some key messages, and I will not go over them again, but Alison has already mentioned, and I'll just pick one of them, which was that there's generally a data deficit on the content, and particularly an accurate data and data sharing structure that can foster the attainment of the SDGs. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the mic to Martin Hullen, who is our Deputy Executive Director for INJ. And after that, we'll have a learning module presentation from Elle Olivier, who is the learning designer at Noodle based in South Africa. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and welcome again to everybody who either joined us for the first time or to the many of you that have actively participated, not only in the knowledge dialogue workshops that we've conducted over the past 2 years, but also might have been at the launch of the regional status report and might have already participated in some of the previous workshops. So the goal of the exercise really was that this is a mechanism where all the outputs, all of what we've been producing so far is based on contributions from the community for the community. And as was pointed out by our dear colleague, Alison Gilwald from Research ICT Africa, with the advent of the African Data Policy Framework and the endorsement across the region, now the point of the implementation phase is a very important and critical one. And as also mentioned, capacity building is an essential piece. And this is why the learning course that we'll be sharing with you today was conceptualized to really provide a very accessible baseline knowledge of cross-border digital policy in Africa and beyond, also building on the know-how that the policy network has been developing for the past 10 years of its existence. The goal of these modules is to make them as accessible as possible through multitude of learning and capacity building platforms that are already available on the platform, on the continent. And another thing that we really want to underline here again, and don't hesitate to reach out to us after today's event, is that the modules we are providing here will be made available in an open source licensing mechanism, which means that they will be accessible as a beta on our own learning platform. But we invite any interested partners to reach out to us if there is an interest in, for example, building on top of these learning modules specific additional expertise that might be relevant from a persecutor's point of view, that might be relevant from a energy efficiencies practitioner point of view, that might be relevant from a data sharing and data privacy point of view. So this is really the goal here. And this is also why the launch today will coincide with an opportunity to actually provide us additional feedback on the way that the modules have been conceptualized. So we'll be sharing links with you shortly. And of course, we'll also circulate emails in this regard. And then once you've reached out to us, we will provide you with a self-enrollment link to the modules. And if you manage to actually successfully work through the several hours of content that is being made available there, there will also be a INJPN related certification there. In the meantime, we'll keep you all posted on the partnerships that we are then in the middle of also pursuing to see if we can also build in addition additional expertise and also capacity through more topical foci that will be linked to those learning modules. So with this, I stop my little monologue there. Very excited to have you all here. And again, a huge thanks to the many of you that have contributed and might be contributing also to additional activities that we have in the pipeline in the future. And with this, I think it is time, Elle, that we actually share a little bit more about the modules, how they came to be, how they look like. So please, Elle, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm very excited. Today we get to show you what we have been working on, and yeah, I think you guys will like it. So I'm going to just give a quick recap. I'm sure we've through all of these workshops, we've chatted a bit about the whole context of how we designed it and all those things, but I just want to give a quick recap so that we're all on the same page before I show you what it looks like. So we've completed the learning modules, and Noodle is very proud to have done that for you guys. So Noodle is one of the fastest growing online learning companies, because we are very excited to bring online learning to as many people as possible. So we've built the modules. Basically, I'm just gonna scan through the slides quickly. The end goal was for fostering capacity building among policymakers, and we've chatted about that already. And so we hope we've really reached that. So there will be 7 modules, and here they are. And I'm just quickly going to scan through how we've built it, how it's going to work, and some nitty-gritty details about that. So we built it with Rise, and I'm going to show you what that looks like soon. It's going to be hosted on Moodle, but there's a specific virtual learning environment specifically created for INJPN. If you register, you will have specific login credentials that you will log into. You'll get onto the platform and you'll see these 7 modules in front of you. You can do them in a linear fashion if you want to, but you don't have to. And once you complete every module, you'll receive a little badge to show you, to tell you well done, and to make sure that you've completed all the different parts of the modules, and to make sure that you really engaged with it and really got your hands dirty. And then at the end, there will be a certificate that says, well done, you've completed all 7 modules and you are ready, set and go. So on the platform, there will be a little dashboard that will tell you which modules have you completed, which haven't you completed, where did you stop, where do you want to continue. So you'll have a lot of autonomy over your learning experience. And all these modules are SCORM compatible, which means they can be hosted on various different platforms, LMSs. They are scalable on like tablets, mobile phones, PCs, etc. So wherever you want to learn and at whatever pace you want to learn, that is entirely up to you. And it is super flexible to make sure that it is accessible to as many people as possible, which is the goal. Right, so I think I said most of what I wanted to say. There will be little knowledge checks in between. I just want to mention that. And now I think the best is just to show you what it looks like. So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation so that I can show you the modules. Right, so you will log into your platform, and this will be the first module that you see, and you can click on Learn More. And you will have a little drop-down menu on the side, which will tell you the different sections of your module. And this is what it would look like. All the modules will more or less have the same look and feel. And you can scroll down, there'll be little videos, there'll be lots of interactive elements where you can click on and explore more, links that take you to different readings, a little map to tell you where you are in the course. And it's very easy to navigate. It's designed to be very engaging and very visual. So I'm going to scan through. There's some knowledge checks. I'm going to go really fast because I want to get to the good stuff. So it's designed to really chunk the content well and to show you, to keep every little bit of information really relevant, and to not be overwhelming, but to really make sense. So I'm going to get right down to the bottom. Once you have completed a module, I'm going to scan right to the end. You will then, I'm going to skip to module 7 now. So you've done 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And once you get to module 7, you will open it. And the first thing for every module that they will ask you is, did you complete the previous module? You'll say yes, and you'll get a little badge because you did well. And you will complete, so module 7 shows you all that you've completed every single module there is, and you will continue. It's very easy to navigate. You can navigate back and forth. The platform will remember where you were, where did you stop, etc. You won't be graded, but you will. It'll remember if you've completed it or not. So you're encouraged to really engage with all the content, go through everything, make sure you've you've seen everything you need to see. So yeah, I just want to get right to the end so that you can see your very last little badge, and just to show you all the lovely clickable parts and how fun it is. And it's very much designed to be a hands-on, engaging course. And there will be little downloadable packets where you can reflect, where you can keep this information, like a little summary, some activities for you to engage with, and then yay, you've completed module 7. Well done. So we really look forward to hearing all your feedback and to get to see how you get your hands dirty. And yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elle, for providing us with the visual of what the learning modules will look like. And thank you also to Martin for contextualizing today's launch event. I will share my screen again so that you can see who will be the next up on our agenda. So we'll get moving along with the agenda so that everybody has an opportunity to speak. And I would turn to Nashilongo Gervasius, who is going to lead us in the discussion with our panelists, with our invited guests today. And Nashilongo is the founder and managing consultant at Namchue, I hope I'm saying that right, Digital, based in Namibia. And she'll be welcoming our speakers, Nima Lungangira, Linda Bonyo, and Gbenga Sasan. I'll hand it over to you to give a little more details about this session, Nashilongo.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you to all the previous speakers that we had doing the introductions to the report and to the actual learning modules today. So my name is Nashilongo. Tracy, you've already introduced me. I would possibly ask my panelists to introduce themselves, and we do a quick round of engagements. But before I do that, just take the snippet as from the foreword of the report, particularly that says that the report explores why policy coordination is important to building an inclusive and vibrant digital economy in Africa. And it identifies key trends taking shape across the region and presents opportunities and challenges for government, private sector, and civil society actors to consider. I thought that stood out very well and possibly shapes our next 45 minutes of discussion. So in doing that, I would maybe quickly just ask my panelists to quickly do an introduction of their work and intersection to data or data economy in Africa, and then we kick off the conversation going forward. I see immediately Mr. Sashan, Benga Sashan, say hello, and then Benga, after Benga, I'll ask Nima and Linda to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Nashilongo. Hello, everyone. Benga Sashan here from Paradigm Initiative, and I'm glad to have this conversation today. Data is central to the work we do at Paradigm Initiative, and last week we just launched our 2022 report on digital rights and inclusion in Africa, London, and data clearly is one of the central conversations there. So I look forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Benga. I'm glad to be joined again today. The next is Honorable Nima Lungangira. Honorable, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Nashilongo. Hello, everyone. I'm Nima Lugangira, Member of Parliament in Tanzania, but also Chair of the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance, which is a network that brings together African parliamentarians so that we can strengthen our own role in digital development in Africa. Currently, we have about 34 members of parliament from about 24 African countries. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Honorable Rungangira. I'll call up next panelist, Ms. Linda Bonyo. Linda, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Linda Bonyo, and I apologize for not being able to join on video. I have infrastructure issues, so you'll forgive Africa for this. But I am the founder and the CEO of the Lawyers Hub. We are based in Nairobi and work on digital policy across the African continent. We also convene the Africa Law and Tech Festival, which is a platform for discussion on digital policy issues. Our next edition is in July, and we're talking about digital trade, which we think is really important towards getting Africa to a single digit market, and especially a single data market. So it's a pleasure to be on this discussion, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Linda. And I will start with you possibly to answer our first question or our first round of discussion. You must have seen the report, obviously, and you have engaged with it. What are the key challenges to cross-border digital policies that are highlighted in this report that are particularly of importance for addressing in Africa?
Thank you very much. I have read the report, and I was at the launch as well in Ethiopia at the IGF. I think this is very useful work. And also the sort of stakeholder engagement that has happened, I think even from Malawi at the Internet Governance Forum that we had for Africa, I think has really been important. And some of the issues that are recurring on the report that we see is, one, the legal and regulatory framework. I believe that's a huge concern. We lack harmonization of legal structures within the African continent. And I think Dr. Allison highlighted this at the beginning of her conversation. There's a need to really make sure that Africa speaks to itself around policy and ensures that that speech is coherent. And I think we've had challenges with Malabo Convention and states ratifying Malabo Convention. I think it points to one, our policy processes, political goodwill, but then also the pace at which technology has changed. And also two, the second challenge I think is important to discuss is on infrastructure, digital infrastructure in terms of affordability, in terms of reliability, and also in terms of access. Those are questions that I think we're still grappling with. And so what that means is that you will find the big tech countries, like you'll find Egypt and South Africa and Kenya and Ghana and Nigeria having different sets of problems compared to other countries, for instance. And so what that means is that there's a mismatch in terms of policy priorities, I believe even at the African Union level. And there's a need to bring us to the same level. And then I think the third point that was also highlighted by the Deputy Executive Director, he mentioned coordination, which I think there's duplicity that's happening a lot in the continent. A lot of the policy interventions that are happening, even the work done by different organizations, really we see similar work that aren't speaking to each other, that also are not really engaged. And then my final comment will be on my first point, that we have a lot of laws that really are pushing forth the narrative of strict localization. And I think this is really a problem, because then countries are not open towards, opening up their data markets, ensuring that ideally data benefits the African continent, and we actually have a free flow of data. And maybe just to open up the discussion, maybe for the rest of the panelists, is also to consider what was mentioned about our policies really being policies from abroad. They are not made for Africa, they're not made in Africa. And so you find that implementation of even data protection regulations is impossible, because we may have picked a European model, but we don't have a European funding, we don't have a European political structure that can ensure that ideally there's independence of these offices, there's resourcing of these offices. So I think those are some of the challenges that I would highlight, especially from the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, for pinpointing some of those key issues. I'll ask Mr. Sashan just the same question on the key challenges that you encounter in the report that are very important for Africa to address. Benga?
Thank you, Nashilongo, and thanks, Linda, for setting the stage on that. I don't want to repeat the issue of I call it the lessons from Malabo. And I think we've all talked about that. I spoke with one of the regional superpowers, as they call them, and I asked them, why haven't you joined the list of 13 who have ratified, or the list of 18 who have signed the Malabo Convention? The response was, why should we? It's old and it's dated and all that. And that was worrying for me, because even though it is a dated document, the fact that out of 55, you can only get 13 to commit as serious as cybersecurity and personal data protection is a major lesson for us to learn. And I think that now that we're having conversations about cross-border data policies, we need to come back to the lessons that we've learned. And I think the first lesson is that bottom-up works. Much of Africa's policies are driven, unfortunately, by funding interests or by, models that are developed elsewhere. So we had a wave of GDPR models across the continent. So everybody was copying GDPR because there was a GDPR in Europe. Now you have an NDPR in Nigeria, even though Nigeria does not really have a comprehensive data policy, framework, which is now beginning to have. And you have all this, copycat models. And what you do when you copy from, from top to bottom is that you have a lot of contextual inconsistencies, and then there is a problem. Right now we have, everyone is talking about DSA, Digital Services Act, and of course it's a new fact to then say, okay, let's copy this code of conduct from Europe. And I think there's a big challenge there, and a big lesson also. The big lesson is that top down never works. It has to be bottom up. It has to be that the interests of the countries are taken into cognizance as we develop these policies, or there should be enlightened self-interest. If a certain country is as concerned about data localization, as Linda has mentioned, which, by the way, has been a very interesting way to put this argument. You do not need to localize for you to be able to have data sovereignty. We've had all the cybercrime, conventions and all these conversations, all these bilaterals, and the same can apply, to data and to other areas. So when you have a scenario where one country says data localization is the make or break for us, then you have a challenge with continuing that conversation, because it then becomes, first of all, an excuse, for that government to then hold private sector hostage. And I've seen this happen in many countries where, a country says, we want you to localize your data, we want you to register in our country. And because of that, the people who suffer are the citizens. And as far as, the companies are concerned, they're looking at markets in terms of numbers. They're not looking at staying in markets where they're going to have problems. Except in a few cases like India, where they know that not working in that market is probably going to be disaster for them, then they continue. But if you're a country of 2 million people and your government is literally holding you hostage in terms of data localization, and I see Nashilongo smiling when I said 2 million people. Don't worry, you're more than 2 million, at least slightly more than 2 million. So we have that challenge of Africa not talking to Africa, and I think it's really important that we do that. It's absolutely important that we do that. The second is in terms of the common African voice. And I honestly think, it's about the same thing. We have so many processes, and processes are not a problem. Processes are not a problem. The real problem is making sure that we articulate our conversations around these processes. Small me, I'm part of tens of conversations. So I can imagine how many conversations that countries are part of. But the challenge, and I'll give a very simple example in the IGF. At the IGF, you're supposed to have country level conversations, and country level conversations should feed into sub-regional conversations, which should feed into the regional African conversation, which should then feed into the global conversations at the IGF. But what you'll find is that many times the conversations happen at the IGF do not have solid regional conversations, and you don't come to a common voice. Look at the cybercrime conversations at the UN at the moment, you can tell that many African nations only get there to either side with people who, share documents with them or who lobby them. So I want to, stop at those 2 points and say that, number one, we do not need to stress ourselves over and over again with the lessons that we have learned. There's a lesson from Malabo. Bottom up is what works, and we have to take advantage of that. And secondly, a common African voice is a stronger voice. Copying everything that exists elsewhere may be a place to start if we can get the context right, but we need to talk more to each other. And it shouldn't always happen only when funders and international organizations bring us to the stage.
So thank you, Benga, for that roundup. I just want to move over to Honorable Ngangira in Tanzania. You are chairing a sort of network of members of parliament from throughout the countries. You've had issues as raised by all our speakers before, issues of harmonizations, issues of major frameworks not being signed, for instance. To what extent is this an issue that Africa needs to address, in particularly from the report perspective? Honorable Lungangira, I think you are muted.
Sorry, thank you, Nashilongo. First, I would like to thank iJurisdiction for giving me the opportunity to provide my reflections on the cross-border digital policies in Africa report, and in particularly Tracy's never-ending support throughout the process. I'll start off with where my colleague just left off, saying a common African voice is a stronger voice. And it is precisely for that particular reason that we as African parliamentarians have decided to come together, because in both the two previous speakers, they expressed and shared different challenges from their perspective, from a tech perspective, from a CSO's perspective, but all of that somewhere links to us as legislators, because we're talking about policies, we're talking about legislation, we're talking about regulatory environment, which means ourselves as lawmakers play a critical role in this process. However, it's very common, and this is one of the things that we're trying to advocate for a change in, is these discussions happen in exclusion of parliamentarians. So I think that's the number one challenge, and that can perhaps explain even the challenges that we have with the Malabo Declaration. You know, the Malabo Declaration is something that happened at African Union heads of states, and then it ended there. But for that to be ratified in the different countries, you need the national parliaments to get involved. Now, how are the national parliaments, in the sense of parliamentarians, gonna get involved if they were not involved prior? You know, I can tell you for a fact that there's a huge difference in me reading a document and me being part of the process of that document. So I think it's also important for us to recognize this dynamic and to come up with ways in which we can change the landscape. And in whatever we do, in whatever intervention we do, ask ourselves, have I engaged our parliamentarians? It's also very common, this is across throughout the network and all my 34 colleagues, you find that when there is an issue or a hot topic, that is when CSOs are rushing to engage parliamentarians. So it becomes some sort of a rush process to just tick boxes. And then there are times in which, definitely in each of our parliaments, we have parliamentary committees. So naturally, if it's something to do with the ICT sector, you'd go to the relevant parliamentary committee that is responsible for ICT. But sometimes as a stakeholder, you can also do some mapping, because you may very well find there are other members of parliament who are not sitting in that particular committee, but they're versatile, they're committed and interested into the agenda. So it's important, yes, deal with the ICT related committee, but also have room to pick other parliamentarians from other sectoral committees. And that is something that the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance we're trying to do, is we realize that ICT, digital tech, it's multi-sectoral. So we cannot be a network of only parliamentarians who are sitting from the ICT sector. We need people from the health sector. We need people from the education sector. We need people from the agricultural sector, from the community development sector. And that becomes important. I can give a quick example. Here we're talking about cross-border data flows. There's an issue of agricultural produce. A lot of our countries are into agriculture and depend on agriculture for foreign revenue. And alongside that, there's a lot of different kinds of innovations and digital applications that are supposedly there to help farmers. Now, from a digital perspective, once you've made the app, you're done. Give a you tap yourself on the shoulder. But if you have a parliamentarian who's now from the community perspective, or the education perspective, or the gender perspective, they can say, hang on, in my community, we don't have internet access. We don't have good connectivity. So this app, how is someone going to use it? If you have a parliamentarian from the education sector, they say, hang on, what about the literacy level of the farmers? Do they even know how to use it? So all of these things come into play. And going back to the question very quickly about the challenges of cross-border digital policies, I think very quickly is one, each of our countries, or many countries right now, are coming up with data protection acts. Now, these data protection acts are not necessarily speaking to each other. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two, within our countries, within the African continent, we have regional blocks. For example, Tanzania sits in the East Africa community as well as the SADC. Now, what is the data protection mechanism in these two regional blocks? So I think when we're talking about cross-border digital policies, it's very important to see how can we harmonize our data protection acts, because these are the fundamentals which will pave way. But then to conclude, we also have the African Continental Free Trade. How are we going to benefit from this Africa Continental Free Trade area if our data protection policies are not speaking, our other sectoral policies have not taken into account this issue of digital? How is that going to work? How are we going to also manage the issue of data storage? Where is this data being stored? And the monetization of this data? These are all things that need to be discussed. And the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance, we're trying to be part of these discussions and to see how can we amplify our voices from the global south to the different discussions that are happening in the global north that will have a natural impact to us in Tanzania. For example, the UN Global Digital Compact. I think I can end there for now, Nashilongo. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Lungangira, and thank you for that round of highlighting the key challenges that are highlighted within this report. And moving forward, I just want to highlight what Ella has already presented here. Looks like a fantastic course. And from what you have seen so far, our panelists, why do you believe that this course and others like it are essential? Why do you believe could be the expected impact out of a course like that? We could start with you, Mbenga.
Thanks, Shilongo. We often say that if you want people to consider something very important, put it in a course that has a badge that they get at the end of it. That's I mean, that's quite interesting. But I think there are a few things. First for me is the fact that when you put something in a structured format, you give people an opportunity to learn about it better. I'll tell you that for a fact, many people who are digital rights advocates today, especially those who work in data and other sectors, have not really had any formal or structured education in some of the elements of the areas where we work. And so it's very important to when you put structure around knowledge. And I think this is really critical. This is why Paradigm Initiative, we've always believed in what we call Digital Rights Academy, because it helps you to be able to take, definitions, concepts, and then applications. So that's number one. The second for me is, I think, the fun way. I saw the demo earlier, and I love the fact that you get asked, did you complete this section, and you get a badge and things like that. And guess what? There's something called LinkedIn. Everyone knows LinkedIn. And these days, LinkedIn is a very happy place. I love LinkedIn, by the way, more than Twitter. LinkedIn is a happy place. Twitter is an angry place at times. On LinkedIn, everyone is always updating. I've just done this course and things like that. And I can imagine that it would be fun for people to begin to share this, for it to be trend, to trend on LinkedIn, and others are able to also learn from that. But the third for me is, I want to see what kind of applications will come from those who are the first set of people who get knowledge from these courses. I love courses. I love when people take them, but what I want to see is how people are able to apply this. And I trust that the fact that there's a structure around this, the fact that there will be some social sharing, will also be able to help structure social sharing impact. Thanks, National.
Thank you, Benga. Linda, are you there? I just also want to have your feel about this course. What sort of impact do you anticipate with it?
I think there's need for evidence-based policy sharing, and this course is based on a report, which is really important to ensure that we have policymakers who actually have evidence of what works and what doesn't work, and also what their needs are, because the process has been that we have the report has gotten feedback from I think Tracy mentioned over 100 policymakers in the past year, which I think is important. But then also to use it as a platform for engagement and dialogue on how we could do responsible data sharing. I think that has been an issue on what's responsible data sharing and what are these best practices that we could have. I think that's important. And then finally is just to build the capacity and knowledge of different stakeholders. We've seen this work at the Internet Governance Forums, that there's a need to, invest in everyone who comes on the table, whether it's civil society, academics, policymakers, or even industry representatives. I think that's very important. So the community that will be coming out from, I think this course is very important, and I'd urge you all to be part to sign up for this course. I think it's pretty important.
Thank you, Linda. Honorable Lungangira, I'm back at you. Is this course most likely to interest some of your network members, and what sort of impact do you anticipate within the overall policy making framework for Africa?
I think definitely this course would be of importance because it provides an opportunity of peer-to-peer learning. So to me, I'm seeing it as a capacity building kind of opportunity for us. And already some of my colleagues have already gone through it, and we've been discussing it through our own network. But one of the things that I think it's important also for iJurisdiction to consider is that there may be a need to consider to having to offer some sort of scholarship for the trainings, because not everybody who may want to take the course, especially coming from public sector, may be able to afford the price of the costs. So I think it's very important for them to come up with packages and take that into consideration, as it may limit the number of people who can join, or the people who join will probably be from a certain sect. But the other thing I think that it's important for us to discuss, though I'm not sure how well it's highlighted, and I think that's something maybe if iJurisdiction can shed more light on, is the issue of digital taxation. Because we're not talking about cross-border digital policies. We also we shouldn't shy away from the issue of taxation. And that if other sectors, I'm a strong believer that if other sectors are being taxed, then so should the digital sector be taxed. So I think it will also be an interesting learning in terms of the digital tax based policies and getting the best learnings from each other, because we cannot replicate from what's happening in the EU or the US global north as a whole, but we need to come up with things that are relevant for our African context. Yeah, but definitely it's a great course, and it will give an opportunity for us as legislators to get that additional capacity building and knowledge so that we can localize our own policy and regulatory framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Lungangira. I have not been able to check the chat. Maybe at this point, would like to check with Sophie from INJ. Sophie, is there any comment?
No, there aren't any questions yet, I would say, or specific comments, but perhaps if people, want to raise their hand and speak directly, otherwise.
Right, thank you, Sophie. In the absence of specific questions, I'll just use this opportunity to open the floor for engagement to our participants who are in this call. Maybe just speak on how can this cause contribute to the knowledge sharing and what other within your data or policy ecosystem wherever you are. Maybe we could engage on that. If you have any questions, suggestion, cases where you would like to situate this course, but also the report would like to hear from you. But as hands comes up for engagement, maybe I will just ask our final round of further engagement with our panelists. And I will start with you again, maybe Mbanga, just to find out, do we see as much capacity building mechanism, particularly on data and those for Africa within the region? That was a question to you, Mbenga. So maybe I will withhold it because I see a hand from Manje. Sophie, would you like to help me with the handling of the engagement from our participants? Thanks.
Sure, yeah, I'll keep an eye out for any other hands, and in the meantime, Manyi, please take the floor.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Hello? Okay. So, thank you for all the presenters and all the information that has been shared so far. What I'm going to because I've been listening to everyone really, and I'm just going to talk about some of the things I've heard. So regarding the Malabo Convention, and I heard someone saying that, was saying some people say it's old. I wouldn't say it's old per se. It maybe they may consider it old because it's dated, but I think most of the countries at the moment have not met up with the basic requirements. And saying it's old maybe because they talking about all the technological advancements that have come up this far, and we know that when it comes to technology, law and regulation, the challenges with that technology is always moving faster than law can meet up with the requirements. So I think, and I do agree that it's not always going to be easy. Top bottom up is going to work. Like we have in these discussions right now, we're talking among ourselves. There are policy makers, practitioners right here. So whenever we have these discussions, it helps to reinforce whatever we're doing on the ground. And I appreciate that we have a representative from the African Parliamentary Network in charge of internet governance. I think one of the ways that they could promote greater enforcement of like regional policies, because I think the Malabo Convention was further reinforced with the Lomé Treaty. So one of the ways that they can strengthen that action is by maybe trying to engage directly with data protection authorities, because states are lagging behind in terms of establishing data protection authorities. And maybe when they start engaging with data protection authorities in other states, it may push the other states to understand that there is something that has to happen at this level. And in order for them to participate, then they have to have those data protection authorities in place. And also, I was thinking when this course as it is right now, I hope it was taking on board the fact that like we have all these challenges in terms of cross-border data sharing, but even now with the development of AI, it's going to get even more intensive because we're talking about the continental data transfers in terms of like developing AI. Africa will have to come into that at some point. Countries going to go on this like individually with policies that are not harmonized. And so I think there is a lot that has to be, and I'm happy that this course is going to be rolled out. And I hope that the right people will be able to take the course. And I hope that we can build on it eventually, because there are other stakes that come up. As long as technology keeps advancing, there are other things that will be added. We're thinking about privacy enhancing technologies, for example. So there is a lot, and I'm happy that this initiative is already here, and I'm grateful to be part of it, and I hope for the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Mani. I hope I am having your name correctly. I don't know if there's any other hands. I can't seem to be seeing any.
Bertrand mentioned in the chat that he had some thoughts to share based on the discussion. So.
Yeah, I'm apologies for budging in, but I just wanted to emphasize something that I really appreciated in what Nima was mentioning in two dimensions. One, the articulation between the level of the executive that negotiates treaty and arrangements and the relationship with the parliamentary process, particularly because in many cases there is second stage that requires the implementation in each country of what has been agreed upon by the governments at the level of head of states in the negotiation of a treaty. And this is a situation that we have experienced in the European Union when we had the system of directives as opposed to regulations, where you have to transpose the agreement at the regional level into each national legislation. And I completely agree with what Nima said, which is that it is much harder to get into the implementation process when you have not fully participated in the negotiation of the treaty itself. And I think it may be one of the reasons why so many people are noticing that the Malabo Convention is not transposed, let alone ratified, in many countries. And the second dimension that you mentioned is the cross-cutting nature of some of the issues, and the fact that within parliamentary processes, but this applies to other spaces as well, because the silo approach is a very frequent situation, there are interdependencies between the different sectors, and what is being adopted in a ICT or digital policy framework has consequences in the dimension of other fields. It can be agriculture, it can be something else. And this is one of the reasons why in my brief introduction, I mentioned one of the things that came out of the discussions in preparing the report, that the connection between the digital policies and the sustainable development goals is something that is extremely important for Africa. Of course, there's the need to develop the digital economy per se, but there is an enormous potential, particularly around data sharing and what we call responsible data sharing in the Datasphere Initiative environment, to apply to things that are directly related to the daily life of people. And it can be food security, it can be agriculture, it can be energy, and it can be a lot of situations regarding even urbanism or smart cities or things like that. So I just wanted to emphasize those two elements, which are really great comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Bertrand, on emphasizing that again. I think our time has also come to an end. I'll just quickly ask our panelists to give like a 30-second conclusion on what the opportunity they once again find with the course, but also what this report means for the African context. Thank you. We start with Mbenga, Linda, and then we end with Nima. Thanks.
Thank you, Nashilongo. The opportunity to work together has just increased with a chance for us to rely on curated content that is structured, and I look forward to being able to do that between more African institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My apologies. Thank you so much for having us today. and also see that there's opportunity for us to, exchange on initiatives that are happening across the African continent. It is my hope that as we continue to bring together policymakers, organizations, and individuals, they will be able to share these, opportunities that leverage on building digital infrastructure, increasing connectivity, and just simply improving access, which I think is also important as we talk about data. Have a good evening. Thank you.
From my end, first of all, thank you very much once again for the opportunity of being here. But very quickly, I think I would like to call upon all of you on this call and your colleagues and people within your network that to use the opportunity that as legislators we've come forward through the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. We're willing to learn, willing to collaborate, willing to work together so that we can collectively ensure that we achieve sustainable digital development in Africa and be part of Africa's success story. So we are available, so reach out, and we're willing and ready to collaborate. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those words. I pick collaboration and working together. Thank you very much. So this is the point I hand it over to Tracy. I think it's Tracy. Tracy and the entire INJ team, thank you for coordinating this and having this conversation. I sign out for now.
Thank you so much, Nashilongo, for moderating this great session and discussion with our panelists. I was going to open the floor up again, just in case anyone has any further comments they would like to make. Please know that you can also make those in the chat box and also communicate with us via email. And so I'd like to thank all of our participants, and the links to the report and the executive summaries in English and French are available on our website. And they were also shared with the links in the chat function today. And in closing, I mentioned earlier, we'd like to invite you to participate in this first round of to enroll for the learning modules. And before I close, I would like to hand over the mic to Martin again, so that he can share also some closing remarks and next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our esteemed panelists, to all of the speakers, and to the team. And first and foremost, thank you to you for having joined us today, because, yeah, as we mentioned, without the community, we could not have engaged in the production of all of this wonderful content. And we, as an Internet Jurisdiction Policy Network team, are very thankful for the engagement of over 300 experts over the course of this 22-month process that took us, as we mentioned, through the knowledge dialogue workshops, the joint production of the regional status report, and of course the learning modules that we've been launching today. And this engagement was really across the board, trying to include the different stakeholder groups, not only thought leaders and policymakers, but also academics in their own right,